Friends, welcome to Zealots at the Gate, a Comment original podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen. Send us an email with feedback, questions at zealots@comment.org, and make sure you tag us on social media. I'm Matthew Kamick.
And I'm Shadi Hamid. Matt and I are good friends, but maybe you wouldn't expect that. Matt's Christian, I'm Muslim. Matt's conservative, I'm sort of liberal. Matt's white, I'm brown. Also, Matt's a theologian, I'm a political scientist.
Together we research religion, politics, and the future of democracy at Georgetown University. Thanks for joining us.
So the fertility debate is back. There's been big pieces in the New York Times, the Financial Times, from Derek Thompson, who's been writing a lot about this as well. And it feels like we're sort of contending with what seems like an unusual moment where birth rates are crashing, not just in the US and Europe, but in the developing world as well. And one of the stats that really struck me recently was the fact that Mexico, Tunisia, and Iran now have lower fertility rates than the US. So this is not a rich country, poorer country kind of thing. It's something that is broadly universal. So we want to get a better sense of what's going on. There's a lot of explanations for why this might be the case, and there isn't really an agreement. But we will try in this episode to come to some kind of understanding. We're joined by Lyman Stone, who is really one of the leading demographers who explores these questions around fertility rates. He's a senior fellow and director of the Pronatalism Initiative at the Institute for Family Studies. He's also the director of research at the consulting firm Demographic Intelligence. Lyman, welcome.
It's great to be with you.
So maybe just to get started, what are you making of this recent uptick in debate and argument around this issue? Why is it kind of catching more steam now? And maybe give us a summary of just how bad is it? Because I think that's something that's hard for a lot of people to get their heads around. Is this really something people should be freaking out about? One thing that I think we should freak out about is the example of Thailand, just to kind of give people some background. Thailand's fertility rate is 0.8. That means that the average woman has 0.8 children. The replacement rate, which we can talk about, which is 2.1, which is what you need to keep population stable over time without immigration. So if Thailand continues having a 0.8 fertility rate, one estimate is that it would have only 2 million people in 200 years. And that was going around on Twitter, and people were commenting on that, which was really a remarkable thing for me to see. And because I just would never see it as that
Thailand's
stark.
not a rich country.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, take it away and tell us what's going on.
So there has been, over the last several years, just really rapidly growing interest in the topic of falling fertility. I mean, definitely some of that is because you could call it the Elon effect. Elon cares about it, and so he gets people talking about it. But that's not all that's going on. The main thing happening is just fertility keeps falling in lots of countries around the world. And as it goes down, more people notice. And a lot of these sort of, explanations for why you wouldn't have to worry about it start to sound less persuasive, right? When we say, well, you don't need to worry about a short-term decline in fertility because it might come back up in a few years and it's just a tempo effect. But when you're looking at a decline that's been going on continuously for 20 years, you start to think, wait, it's not coming back up, is it? So part of what's just going on is just that people are catching up to the reality of events. And that fertility is not coming back up. It doesn't seem like this is just a passing thing. That's not to say it's never going to come back up, but just this is clearly something that's going to be with us for a little while. And in terms of, well, why would people care about that? I think people intuit a lot of reasons to care about falling fertility. People might intuitively understand if there's just fewer young people in society, that it's harder to support old people. So you can think about something like Social Security, pension plans, things like that. But it's actually, there are plenty of other reasons people might intuit that falling fertility is a problem too. They might see it as just fundamentally sad to not have babies around and kids. They might worry about the economic effects of fewer young people to grow the economy and contribute to innovation, since young people account for a disproportionate share of innovation and entrepreneurship and patenting. There's any number of reasons people could worry about this. If you're South Korea or Taiwan or Ukraine, you might worry about it because it might threaten your ability to field an army to defend your country. If you are Estonia or Latvia or Hungary or Liechtenstein or Malta, you might worry about it because, saying, oh, in 200 years there will only be 2 million Thai people. Well, 2 million is still a lot, and 200 years is a long time. But what if you're a country that only has 1 million people right now? Well, in 50 years, there's still going to be 100,000 of us. You're like, well, what you're saying is your language is going to go extinct and your whole culture is going to die. So that sounds very scary. So people have all kinds of reasons that they worry about this. For me personally, I'm not insensible to those kinds of macroeconomic worries or things like that. But my main worry is actually a different one. When people get into their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, if they go into those years without children or with fewer children than they wanted to have, it's associated with a lot of worse outcomes, particularly for mental health. Ending your reproductive years with a different number of children than you want to have is associated with much worse mental health, less happiness, less meaning in life. Aging without family is associated with much greater costs of aging, with worse health outcomes. The reality is that people who will take best care of old people are their children. And so if they don't have children, or if they have too few children to take care of them, the result is just a lot of misery in the world. A lot of people who will spend decades of their life realizing that they missed the boat on having any connection to what comes after them. And so regardless of the macroeconomic effects, just the human cost on that I see as a pressing problem.
Yeah, so Lyman, I imagine you have a lot of armchair public policy experts who like to weigh in on this fertility crisis, and I imagine, do. And I wonder if you could sort of outline for us some of the big myths that you are constantly coming up against of, what this fertility crisis means, what causes it, and what are the quick solutions, the quick fixes. So what do you come across that sort of the armchair folks? What are their takes on this?
That's a great question. So the most common one is, well, isn't fertility declining just because people are rich nowadays? And as soon as someone says that, they say this because it's received wisdom. Oh, we're a rich society, so we don't have kids anymore. But then you just ask, why? If I had infinite money, personally, would that make me not have kids? No, it wouldn't. So, okay, so what is it about being rich? Well, it turns out actually a country getting richer doesn't necessarily reduce fertility. Individuals getting richer doesn't necessarily reduce fertility. In fact, fertility tends to go up with male income in particular. That's men's income. With women, it's much more complicated because there's also kind of a time management challenge there. So what is it that actually leads to this association between wealth and fertility that causes people to just deeply believe that fertility decline is like an inevitable element of fertility decline? And I could get into that a bit, but suffice to say for that first myth, the simple reality is when income goes up, babies don't go down. It's just not true. There's other elements of economic, structural, and cultural modernity that cause low fertility. It's not actually the prosperity side of it that does that. Now, one of the things that does do it is child mortality. As more kids survive, people have fewer kids because humans are family-sized targeters. We're not live birth targeters. We're family-sized targeters, and those are different things. People want to raise a certain number of children, which is why when children die, fertility tends to go up. That is, if you're reproductive age and your child dies, your odds of having another child go up, not down. You'd think it might go down because like the trauma of losing a kid would make you like, oh, but the reality is humans as a species, in a general rule, are family size targeters. We replace mortality. So first big myth is that more money, less babies is not true. The best studies suggest more money, more babies, and there's just other things happening in modernity. Another one is about the sexual revolution and contraception. A lot of people believe the reason fertility is declining is because of the sexual revolution and contraception. Obviously, we can't fully untangle broadly shared social trends like sex being separated from marriage. That's going to be hard to fully untangle, but by and large, this is not the main source of falling fertility. Fertility was below replacement in many contexts before modern contraception was available. Then it rose during the baby boom, and then it fell again after the pill. The best explanation is actually that fertility during the baby boom was so much higher than what people actually wanted, basically because they were having early marriage but high child survival, so they were raising a lot of kids that they weren't prepared to raise, that there was so much demand for contraception that in some sense demand summoned the pill into existence, you could say, which is kind of a strange way of thinking about innovation, but endogenous innovation is actually like a very plausible theory of why and what innovation happens. So it's not contraception, it's not income. Another one people will often get at is basically like women's rights, right? Okay, fertility's low because we let women vote and have rights and speak and preach or whatever. So, maybe it's these uppity women ruining the fertility rate. And it actually turns out not to be that either. While there is a correlation between women's various measures of women's social position and fertility rates, the reality is that nowadays, countries where women earn a larger share of income actually have a lot of higher fertility rates than similar income countries where women earn less of the income. Families that have highly egalitarian norms do not necessarily have the lowest fertility rates in society. It tends to be that the highest fertility rates are your very conservative families, and then your lowest fertility rates tend to be your gender moderate families. You kind of have to pick a family model. You can't kind of do one family model. You have to pick one. And if you try to just kind of do it, your divorce rates are really high and your number of children ever born are really low. So you either have to egalitarian max or trad max. You have options, but you have to pick one. So the reality is humans benefit from scripts, from clear roles. Most of our choices are not deeply considered individual choices. We're following scripts. So I'd say those are three big myths, is that this is basically about contraception, this is basically about income, or this is basically about women's rights. And it's really not about any of those. We see places where women don't have access to contraception, where women don't have many legal rights, and where they are not very rich, we still see fertility falling.
What about women just entering the workforce in larger numbers? That's a little bit different than women's rights. And that gets at, if women are getting more education, they're delaying marriage for longer periods of time. They're prioritizing sometimes their own career over building a family. And that seems to be a shift that is somewhat universal, even in relatively religious countries in the Middle East, for example. The Middle East, fertility rates are crashing too, as I sort of alluded to with the examples of Iran and Tunisia, but also Egypt for that matter. So tell us a little bit more about the workplace environment and the fact that women don't need men. They can choose to be married now, where in a previous era, it was the default. No one really questioned whether or not you would get married. You had to, unless you were a very weird person. But now women have more options, and as men fall behind and become more disappointing in a number of measures, whether it's employment or college graduation, women are not finding partners who are equivalent to them in terms of educational attainment.
Yeah, so women entering the workforce, as women entered the workforce, there was some negative effect on fertility, particularly because at that time, employers really would refuse to keep moms in the workforce. I mean, it wasn't just the women's choice. It was that employers often just said, well, you're having a baby, you're gone. So you see these huge motherhood penalties in the 40s, 50s, 60s, where when women would have a kid, their odds of being able to remain employed just plummet. Today, it's way smaller. Motherhood penalties today are way smaller. Women have a kid, their employer doesn't fire them for it. In fact, that's illegal in most developed countries. And many women choose to compatibilize these things. And so today, fertility of working women today is is still maybe a bit smaller than like stay-at-home moms, but the gap has shrunk. And at the country level, countries where women have higher labor force participation rates, at least among like OECD countries, don't necessarily have lower fertility rates. So it doesn't seem like that's some inevitable effect. Now, more interestingly, you brought up the question of the essentiality of marriage, and that does matter. Okay, so you can kind of think of fertility in your mind. You can kind of decompose it into two parts. Okay, one is, or I guess three parts. One is entrance into a stable union, usually a marriage, but legal marriage doesn't always map onto a union that's expected to be stable. And there's different cross-cultural norms in legal marriage, but a stable union. And then you can think of sexual and reproductive behavior within unions and outside of unions. Okay? So like three components: sexual and reproductive behavior in unions, outside of unions, and then just odds of being in a union, in a stable partnership of some kind. It turns out that most fertility decline over the last 20 years and over the last 100 years, and including most fertility increases during the baby boom, can be explained by changes in union formation, not reproductive behavior within union status. Now, there are exceptions to that rule. That's not the whole story. The exact country and period you look at is going to change. Well, does union status explain 40% of fertility change? Does it explain 60%? Does it explain 90%? There's varieties by time and place, but a huge share of change in fertility is just the fact that people aren't marrying as much as they used to. And
that they're marrying later. Right?
Yes, marrying later. Yeah, they're spending fewer reproductive years in a stable union. They are, we could say, to put my nerdy demographer hat on for a second, we would say that they have fewer fecundity-weighted years of exposure to a reproductive union.
All right. No more sexy talk, Lyman. That's enough of that.
Talk demographer to me. So what we're saying here is we're basically, if we just imagined that being 23 and married just exposes you to a hazard of having a baby, which it does, fact check true, then what if we just imagined that people just kind of didn't manage their fertility? They just kind of had, if you're married, you have the married person rate. If you're unmarried, you have the unmarried person rate. And we just manipulate odds of being married. We're saying that basically just your odds of being married are the real thing shaping your odds of having kids. And that really is the case in most countries and most periods. And that being the case, a lot of the fertility discussion really just has to be a question of why aren't people marrying? And part of this is, like you said, women's expectations of men have definitely changed. You could say, women still, there's still a preference. Most women still tend to have a preference for men who are at least socioeconomic peers and ideally have strong earning potential, educational background. Although earnings are more important than education empirically, women are more tolerant of a man who's less educated but earns well than they are of a man who's educated but doesn't earn well. But that being said, men's preferences have changed as well. And you can actually see this, that men increasingly prefer women who have earning potential. Women earning money was a strong predictor of not getting married 100 years ago. It's not anymore. In fact, if you're a young woman who wants to get married quickly, going to college and getting a good job is probably a really good choice. Not going to college is probably not a great choice if you want to get married and have kids. Because nowadays, your odds of getting married are much higher if you go to college, if you're a woman. So I don't think we want to see this as just women's preferences changed, because clearly what men value in a partner changed as well, and they value a peer, someone who can keep up. If you're a man and you think that and you think of your family projects as kind of building your empire, which for better or worse is how a lot of map game brained men kind of think about their family life. It's like this project that they're building. Then you don't want to bring on, your senior VP or co-president of the family company who can't keep up.
So, Lyman, a little shift here. So I grew up in Seattle.
I'm sorry.
Beautiful place, sir. Beautiful place. Full of lovely people. But children are thin on the ground in Seattle. And my wife and I had 3 boys there in Seattle. We were a bit of an oddity. We were, I think 35 years old and had 3 kids. And it was not just that we were odd, but it was actually, life was kind of difficult in Seattle with 3 children. And it just sort of felt culturally like it wasn't a place that was very accommodating to a larger family. And I would imagine families of 4 and 5 would have even more difficulty.
35 and 4, cities are tricky for my family.
So it gets me thinking to your earlier point that birth rates don't just bounce up. And I wonder what happens to a culture in a city when it's not used to lots of children for an extended period of time, if it becomes less hospitable to children. And if that plays a role in, like, once birth rates go down, why is it so hard to turn it around?
I had a speaking engagement in Hong Kong where my first child was born. And so I was like, okay, this is like, I'm not paying for the airfares. That's great. So or the hotel room. So I'm going to bring my 2 older kids, my 6-year-old, my 4-year-old with me. And we had a great time. We had so much fun. We saw a bunch of old friends who were basically family, some God family. Did some sightseeing. My kids enjoyed staying in this swanky conference hotel. They thought it was the greatest thing ever. And people were so happy to have my kids around because Hong Kong, very low fertility. They're like, oh, it's so wonderful you brought your kids. Like, of course, like the family speaker guy brought his kids. Like, of course, people were so hospitable and welcoming and they loved to have our kids there. Every single interaction my kids had with anybody was so, so positive because kids are so rare in Hong Kong that they just really want to accommodate and welcome. And that's the problem. When my kids needed to have anything, is your kid thirsty? Let us go get them a water bottle. Do they need a snack? Let us go get them a snack. To walk 2 kids from the conference room back to the hotel room, we're going to send 2 staffers to accompany your kids on the walk. And I'm like, my kid is 6. She can push an elevator button. There begins to become not so much a culture of non-welcome, but a culture of fragility and of ignorance. For example, the hotel we stayed in, fantastic hotel, loved it. I had me, my 2 kids, and then my nephew came to help me with my girls. So 4 of us in a hotel room, and I just didn't think that would be an issue. 4 people in a hotel room. That's not weird. But when I a week before the conference and I'm reaching out to the hotel, hey, I'm looking for stuff for my kids to do during the day. I know you have some activities in the hotel. Can you walk me through what they are? He said, oh, how many kids do you have? And I'm like, I'm gonna have 2 small kids and my teenage nephew with me. He said, oh, we're 3 people per room maximum. And I just thought, wait, so you actually have a legal limit on, that's basically a 1-child policy for hotels. What's the plan here? Oh, book a second room. Well, let's just say this was not a hotel where I could afford to book a second room. But it was this amazing moment where everyone was so hospitable. And this hotel had activities for my kids, a scavenger hunt for my kids. They got to take a mocktail class where they went up to the penthouse bar and the bartender taught them to make juice mocktails and shake up their drinks and all this. They had so much fun, but it was a hotel for 1-child families.
So, that seems like more of a cultural issue than a political one.
It is cultural, but it's a cultural thing in a way that it's not that the society was hostile to kids. They were so welcoming and accommodating to kids.
Yeah.
It was a society that just could not even see their blind spots. They thought they were family friendly. This hotel advertises itself as a premier family hotel in Asia.
So, but I think we still haven't found the smoking gun. We've touched on a few different factors that play some contributing role. And then there's the obvious ones like housing affordability. And there's a lot of data that seems to suggest that plays at least some role, although it's not an overwhelming role. I guess it seems that a lot of different factors play different roles, and it's very hard to isolate the variables. That said, recently, I think there's been some commentators who have really been harping on the smartphone explanation, that we see a drop in fertility rates across the globe when those countries had mass adoption of smartphones, for example. In one of your pieces, you make, I think, a related argument that a culture of selfishness is to blame. So how about this? Can you just tell us what the predominant factor is, if you had to choose one?
I love that you use the smoking gun metaphor, because the real story of like who killed fertility is that it wasn't one bullet. It was a firing squad. There are a lot of factors. So it's not going to be fully reduced. The biggest one is just declining marriage. It just is. But why did marriage decline? And there's many stories at different periods. You know, a shift in educational timing. Adulthood got pushed later. As long as you're in the student social position, you're a child. Just is the case. I will walk across the stage next week or 2 weeks from now and get my PhD. So technically I'll stop being a child in 2 weeks. So don't worry, I dunked on myself there, not just on other people. There's all kinds of factors. Declining marriage is a big one. But in the last 20 years or so, we have seen an unusual decline in fertility. What I mean by unusual is a decline that's hard to explain through a lot of the other factors we would usually use to explain declining fertility. It wasn't a big change in contraceptive usage. It wasn't just a change in marriage, although there was a change in marriage. The decline in marriage accelerated. We see this big decline in fertility across lots of countries, all over the world. And at the same time, we see a digital revolution. Smartphones, Netflix, streaming devices, tablets, everybody having a computer, a globally interconnected community of communication. And a lot of people have theorized that these might be related. And what I have argued, and I will say there is evidence for this, but it's not done being proven. There's still a debate to be had, is that the reason that the digital revolution is reducing fertility is twofold. One is social incapacitation. That basically solo leisure by yourself, is getting really good. Really entertaining. You can do more by yourself than you used to be able to do. Video games, pornography, you can stream endless stuff online. Social media, you can even pretend like you have friends. You could even get on a podcast and talk to people. What you can do alone has greatly expanded, whereas the stuff you can do together kind of hasn't. We didn't invent a great new sport in the last few years, okay? We didn't invent a new way to hang out. We've basically hit peak performance on hanging out. As a result, it's becoming easier and easier to be alone, and more pleasant to be alone. So it's not just fertility that's falling. It's not just marriage. It's sex. It's dating. It's just hanging out. People just spend less time together with friends, with peers, with acquaintances. We're seeing a decline in a lot of indicators of criminality. Young people, they don't get driver's licenses as much. They don't go to parties. They don't drink as much. As a Lutheran, that one's really a threat to my faith. There's all kinds of changes in social life.
Yeah, so let me interrupt you there, because I want to play out I don't know, this half-baked thought I've been having recently, and maybe you can help me out with it. So I grew up in 1990s evangelical subculture where, it seems like in the 80s and the 90s, the big concern for evangelical parents was my kid's going to go out, he's going to date, he's going to have premarital sex, somebody's going to get pregnant. They're going to do drugs or alcohol. They're going to go out with their friends and they're going to cause trouble. And so the church amassed a set of ways to limit against that, a whole degree of technologies to keep kids from having sex or getting drunk or getting arrested or whatever. And I wonder, now I want to pivot towards religion here. And, Shadi, I imagine, from your own Muslim community, there were some of these somewhat similar concerns about dating and sex and whatnot. But I find myself as a parent of a teenager right now, and I'm actually encouraging him to go out and talk to girls. And I'm wanting him to go hang out with his friends. And he's wanting to stay home and play video games. Right. And he'll talk to his friends while he does his video games, but it's a disembodied connection. And my Christianness is saying, no, girls are good. You shouldn't be scared of girls, and you should go talk to them.
Yep.
You should engage and learn and make mistakes and be out there. And as a Christian father and just like theologian, I'm actually pushing them towards these things that my parents would have been warning against. And so it seems like there's almost this reversal that needs to happen within Christian families of actually developing a positive theology of the body, of sex,
because we used to have a technology
Yeah.
in religious communities. We used to have a technology for dealing with, teens going out and sleeping with each other, and it was called a shotgun. And they just got married, and then we stopped doing that for. I think there were some good reasons for abandoning that particular strategy.
Not doing that.
But then it was we need to prevent teen pregnancy, so we're not gonna make the kids get married anymore because we think marriage should come later in life. And I think it's worth noting the extent to which religious communities in North America really did come to develop an unstated theology of marriage, that marriage comes later in life. That a lot of Christians are deeply uncomfortable with the idea of someone marrying at 18. And they feel in their gut that that's wrong, that that's not God's design. It's not the best stewardship of your life. And you run into this, when you actually start pushing on this issue, as I often end up doing in churches, you run into this all the time. That people just really deeply feel that this is wrong. And they have a hard time articulating theologically why. But stipulating that we're not going back to that, we then said, okay, we just really have to prevent teen pregnancy. Okay, because if we're not going to give them the virtuous option of marriage, and we basically told all the young people in our communities, you're no longer allowed to have the virtue of marriage. It's off limits until you're 25 or whatever, or 22. So you can't have that virtue. So instead, we have to really double down on the virtue of chastity. Right? We have to really purity max. Because that's not what historic Christians did. They didn't purity max. They just got married. It was oh, she's cute. We went in the barn. That was a mistake. Solution, we're married.
Lyman, don't go in for romance novels, buddy. That was a terrible story. So, Shadi, as you listen to these two Christians go back and forth, I wonder from your own, Muslim community of dating and getting married, and how are you seeing this play out in your own story and in the Muslim community?
I think there's now a general expectation that you don't get married too early. So I think that even with religious people, there is a secularization effect. They're affected by the broader cultural milieu. And if they watch TV shows, they hear prominent people, they listen to podcasts where people are saying it's normal to wait, and it's better to get your life in order and to focus on your education and your career first. I think that has become the norm in not just in American society, but more broadly. And that leads me to a question that maybe we've found one of the culprits here, that secularization or something about modernization more broadly leads all of these societies across the globe to move in a particular direction. There's a particular logic of modernity that makes people have kids less or focus on having kids less. And so even in, religiously conservative countries, they're still affected by this globalization of Western norms. They're still listening to Western music, watching Western TV. They're following Western people on social media, and smartphones probably accelerate that kind of distribution of norms throughout the world. So I'm curious to turn this into a question. Is how much does secularization matter, and how much does being religious or turning back to religion, can that be a kind of counter to dropping fertility rates?
Yeah, secularization is definitely a big part of the story. particularly in countries coming from the Abrahamic traditions. The more religious segments of society have much higher fertility. That's less true in Hinduism and Buddhism, and in some of the other Eastern religions. But in the Abrahamic traditions, it's certainly the case that religiosity is quite pronatal. And as religiosity has declined, that certainly weakens a set of norms that made it easier for people to find suitable partners, that gave them motivations to marry and stay married, and gave them a sort of script and story about why kids are good. Now, broadly speaking, though, secularization is a real change in norms that probably has fertility effects. We can also think about a process we call developmental idealism, which is kind of what you're saying about Western ideas spreading around the world. Developmental idealism is this the norm of self-development. Okay, the idea that I need to develop as a person, and when all the people in a country are doing a better job developing as people, getting more human capital, whatever, that's how nations develop. And the main barrier to that development at the individual level or nationally is like kids, basically, is like child marriage, young marriage, having kids. And so the way we need to boost ourselves as a country is to not have so many kids. And so this idea has spread around the world. It's very widely believed. Empirically, it's wrong. It just isn't the case that suppressing fertility at the national level accelerates economic growth. But it is something that's widely believed. But the vehicle here, and this is where I think smartphones kind of tie in. I talked before about the social incapacitation function of digital technology, right? It makes being alone great. That's a pretty recent thing. Okay, that's like in the last 25, 30 years. I mean, TV kind of did that, but really modern digital technology just supercharges it. But what TV and radio and before that even, widespread newsprint, and before that the printing press itself, all did do, or the telegraph, is they change the kinds of communities people can interact with. And we have so many studies showing that, like, when you extend TV broadcast into a village, like fertility falls. Like some villages have better radio signals because of like hills and forests and different things that block it. And the villages with better radio signals have faster fertility decline. And it is because of specific norms. And we can see this because sometimes there's like specific TV shows that promote like very specific things that we can track in data as like a unique way of pursuing life. And so we can see that it's not just like a generic, it's not like radio waves fry your babies or something. It's literally just specific norms. And they're norms that we would probably associate with developmental idealism. But the point is, whether secularization or developmental idealism, what these norms all actually are is they are like long run, we could call cultural evolutionary free riding. Okay? Cultures persist because people add babies to them. Most of us want our culture to persist, at least as long as we live. If we don't add babies to them, we are free riding on other people's babies. Okay? No culture survives that in the long run. It's not survivable. But you can survive it for several generations through conversions, migration, extending life expectancy, extending healthy life expectancy. You can survive it for several generations if selection pressures are weak. That is, if you're not dealing with massive pressure on your society to compete on population terms. So what we're really living through is this unique period where selection pressure on societies has been rather weak. And so what we call these broadly self-preferencing norms.
Yeah, I find this argument for developmental norms pretty compelling because one of my favorite authors on capitalism and modernity, Bob Gausward, he argues that capitalism has this sort of vision of progress, and that the purpose of progress in human development is increasing speed, increasing efficiency, increasing power. And so what happens in modernity is you're trying to develop more speed, more power, more growth, and everything is judged upon those metrics. And babies are terribly inefficient. They are horribly slow. They don't help you develop your career or whatever else. And I think so. I hear that in the back of a lot of discussions about children, but I also hear this I think what you were saying earlier of this sense of, I need to develop myself first. I have to finish myself first and get myself to this position of total stability. And then I will be in this position to develop others, rather than understanding, no, I will actually become a man or a woman in and through serving others, not by completing myself and then completing some other project.
Yeah. The whole developmentalist mindset. There's a great book called Reading History Sideways that kind of is like a manifesto of like what developmental idealism is and where it came from. And I do have to push back on the capitalism point because it definitely originated in a pre-capitalist context. Developmental idealism is most clearly articulated early on by like mercantilist societies in their first contact with Native Americans and with sub-Saharan Africans in maritime trade. They encountered societies that were just so obviously poorer than Europe. And they like had to come up with an explanation, like why. And they came away saying that these societies are basically like children. They're just not developed. That eventually maybe they'll develop. But they're like children. They're like a less developed kind of human. And like this gives rise to like all kinds of racism and like all kinds of bad stuff. But it actually is a pre-capitalist ideology. And then of course communism is fully bought in on developmental idealism as well, right? That we basically, so I think broadly what you said was true, but I do want to emphasize
But
that,
it might be better said to be modernity.
Yeah. But then it is interesting that it does connect to the individual, right? That once you believe that once you believe this whole developmentalist framework, right? The historic framework that most Westerners actually most societies believe is a cyclical framework of history, okay? There's good times, there's bad times. Nations rise, nations fall. You have periods of renaissance and decline. And like that's the heuristic that most humans had for history for most of period. Like you read, an empire rose, it fell. Oh, the next one rose, it fell. And yet somehow in like the 1600s, 1700s, we started to get the idea of development. That what if history could just be linear? Like, what if we didn't have to decline again? And like, this is a great thing. I love that we were like, what if we like just beat child mortality? Like, that's fantastic.
Well, I want to pivot us here and sort of say, hey, we've got three dudes talking about having babies and no women here at the moment. And what I'd love to hear from you is your sense of feminist voices out there who are doing a great job on this, or have, some interesting cultural insights on these kinds of issues that you'd like to point our listeners to, or just some good work being done by feminists on these questions.
Yeah. So from kind of you could say like a kind of Christian feminist perspective, Leah Labresco-Sargent has a great book out called The Dignity of Dependence. And she's very much a pronatalist. She wants people to have babies and is writing about this, I think, in a really interesting way. A journalist / researcher who's really interested in this is Stephanie Murray. She has a Substack called, I think, Family Matters. And she does a lot of interesting writing on this and is just a great resource. And she comes to it from, I think, an interesting kind of moderate perspective. And then for like kind of an avowedly feminist, liberal, pronatal perspective, Darby Saxby is a really interesting person to read. I argue with her a lot. I think she's wrong about a lot of things, but she's always interestingly wrong. And I think a lot of people will probably read her and think she's right and I'm wrong, and that's fine. So I would say those three are all really interesting people to listen to. We do have a problem on this issue that a lot of the women who feel most strongly that people should have babies don't have time to like run a Substack because they're raising kids. And so we joke about this at Institute for Family Studies, another organization I work at, that we have a heavily male biased staff. And like we would really like to be like hiring female and empowering female voices in this area. And it's like, yeah, but also like we're all here because like our wives kind of like insist that we do these jobs because they think it's super important and this is the job they want us to be doing. Like I could go do a different job, but this is the job my wife wants me to be doing because she cares about the outcome of this one.
These women say, like, in terms of what kind of cultural structural support are they pointing out is needed or demanded? What sorts of things have you learned from these women on this issue?
I mean, obviously, there are a range of social and structural supports that are often absent. I mean, the first basic one is just alloparenting. That just means other parents, other people to help. We increasingly live in an atomized society where people don't have help. And men often don't really notice that. But women often do, because often the burden of it lands on them. And often, just for various reasons, the meme online is, why does a woman have to plan her husband's social calendar? And the answer is because he doesn't have a social calendar. I planned my own hangout with a friend yesterday, and I was very proud of myself. But just in general, cross-culturally, women socialize more than men, and that's fine. And so women tend to feel that absence more acutely. Beyond that, there are structural supports that are needed to make that happen. You need to have sufficient leave. You need to have, if you're going to have public support for childcare, it needs to be flexible enough that it doesn't just nudge every woman to put her children in daycare, and thus not build any network of actual personal support. Right? A real problem in daycare societies is it really isolates parents from each other. Right? Instead of actually having collaborative care, you end up with professional care. Also, I mean, dads nowadays are more involved than human dads have ever been in any prior human society. That no father has ever been as involved in childcare as modern Western dads are. So, pat on the back, dudes. We rock. Father's Day is coming up. We deserve incredible stuff. I'm not even joking here. It just is true. There have never been fathers as involved as modern Western dads. No man has ever changed more diapers than modern Western dads, or had more time with kids.
Okay, but when you're starting so low, it's not
there
so
you go.
hard.
When you're starting so low,
so
yes,
hard to...
yes. But again, no group of humans has ever seen as great a decline in leisure time as men from 1950 to today. Now you can say, well, 1950s are okay. But again, I think it's important to understand what's going on in fertility, to understand that we're having our lowest fertility moment ever at the time when men are the most helpful they've ever been. Which tells us that the problem is not intra-household dynamics. The problem is not that families are not finding a way to support each other. The problem is the wider culture around them.
But isn't it the case that in countries like the Nordic countries that have much more parental leave, family support, the government really tries to help people have a conducive environment for having kids? Those countries have quite low fertility rates. So it seems...
and this is why I distinguish between a daycare society and a cooperative care society, right? So in a daycare society, like many of the Nordic countries, although they do have higher fertility than Southern Europe does, so they're getting something for their effort. But you don't get some of the benefit of cooperative care from daycare, right? Because you drop off your kid. But one of the benefits of alloparental care, of other people, is you get to spend time with your friends, right? Just last night, we had a friend over. He and I had gone shooting in the afternoon, and then he's a dad of another kid in the same homeschool co-op that we're in. So then we went and we harvested just a ton of mulberries for a lesson that the kids are going to have tomorrow afternoon, and then came over and did dinner together. We all play with each other's kids. We hang out with each other, and so childcare. Our mutual care of our kids is also one of the things that we do together as, middle-aged dad friends. And so the benefit of the problem with state-provided benefits is sometimes that they actually displace some of the benefits of parenting, right? One of the benefits of parenting is having good times with your kids, is being with other parents who are your friends. So parental leave can be very important for that. Childcare can be a problem for that. Cash benefits for kids don't really affect it one way or another. We do need to be thinking about culturally and structurally how we can be creating opportunities to make parenting fun and pleasant. And I think that that's been a real challenge.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I wonder then, when we come to state-provided support, and some of the things you mentioned that are more cultural, I think that they're unlikely to make a big difference on the aggregate level. They might help things around the margins. But I think when people propose policies, what we find in throwing money at the problem, because the East Asian countries have put a lot of money into encouraging people to have kids in different ways, but it doesn't seem to have that much of an effect. So we get to this problem of there isn't really an obvious solution. We can maybe boost fertility rates a little bit higher through the measures that you just mentioned, but it probably won't have that much of a significant effect unless perhaps the state's provided support is more generous. And so far we haven't really tested that out at scale. I was reading something about how there was a Korean company that actually did a very good job of encouraging people to have kids. What did they do? They gave them $68,000. That's going to be hard to scale up at the level of a nation, although maybe it's possible in some countries. But it just shows that it's really an uphill battle. The kind of money that you have to put into these efforts is really tremendous. So is that a reason for losing hope? What is the path forward from your standpoint?
It was not too many generations ago that life expectancy was 30 years. And we could have said, well, look, if you cure cholera, that's not going to increase life expectancy that much because you're still going to die of tuberculosis. So why bother curing cholera? It doesn't move the needle that much. It's going to be really expensive to cure cholera. But you know what? It turns out you put enough money into it, you can cure a whole lot of diseases. One at a time, bit by bit, you climb that hill. And now we live 3 times as long as we used to. In the same way, is there one policy that's going to solve low fertility? No. Because as I said, what killed fertility? It wasn't a single smoking gun. It was a firing squad. And you are going to have to unload every single one of those guns, one by one. It's going to involve hundreds of laws being changed across decades. There will never be a pronatal platform that just increases fertility overnight, except I am obligated to say that there is a country that did do it, Georgia. They had a religious intervention. The patriarch of the Georgian Orthodox Church announced that he would personally baptize and become godfather to any third born or higher child born to a married Georgian Orthodox couple. And the baptism would occur in the brand spanking new cathedral that they leveled a mountaintop to build in the capital city of Tbilisi. So this is a very high status thing. The man was a hero of, a great figure of national pride for many reasons. And when he announced this, the birth rate rose from 1.6 children per woman to 2.2 in 18 months.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and it happened almost exclusively via births to married Georgian Orthodox women. Some of them were first births and second births because they had to have the first 2 to get to the special third one. He just recently died. He baptized something like 55,000 kids under this program, so many that they had to alter canon law because under Orthodox canon law, it's still incest to marry a god sibling.
Huh. And
they were like, oh no, these kids have so many god siblings.
Wow.
So they did a special dispensation. They were like, okay, that rule doesn't count for his god kids. So that one worked. Now, fertility in Georgia, then it went up and then it has gradually declined again. Now, it's still higher than it would have been on the prior trajectory, and it was a big cohort effect, but it wasn't a permanent effect on the TFR. So even that one, it was crazy successful, but even there, this is a long-run problem. So
as the resident theologian, I want to take us out of public policy for a little bit. And I have this, While I'm a Reformed theologian, Stanley Hauerwas is still one of my my favorite to read. I appreciate that. Thank you, man. Hauerwas, he says this. Well, actually, before I get to the Hauerwas quote, I want to just kind of name this one other sort of argument I have heard, which is the argument from despair, which is essentially the world is a terrible place. We have climate change, we have war, we have hate, we have all of these things. Why would I bring a child into this world? And so there's just sort of this sense of despair, this sort of deep sense of despair. And that's an argument that I hear, but it's also, I think, just an unspoken argument in societies in general, just sort of a lack of hope. And it touches on what Stanley Hauerwas had to say about having babies. He says, "The crucial question for us as Christians is what kind of people we need to be capable of welcoming children into this world, some of whom may be born disabled and even die. In a world of such terrible misery," he says, "having children is an extraordinary act of faith and hope." Having children is an act of hope. And in other parts, he says, people who have children believe that they have a story worth telling, that should be continued, that the story we've been telling ourselves is a story we want other generations to tell. And of course, he's talking about the gospel story, but you could talk about sort of a national story that you believe in, that you just think, France is so great that you want that story of France to be told in future generations, and you believe in the story of France. And so that's moving to you. But, for those of us who are religious, we have a story that we want to share with others. But I would love to hear you, just kind of speak about the role of cultural despair and cultural hope. And I don't know if there are statistics on these sorts of things.
Yeah, there are. We're definitely seeing a rise in anxiety and depression in many countries around the world that seems to be associated with digital technologies and the digital revolution and smartphones and all that. And we know that one of the better predictor variables we have for fertility is happiness and depression. People who are pessimistic about the future, people who are sad, people who have any kind of negative affect that we can measure are far less likely to have children. An early diagnosis with a serious mental illness has almost as negative an effect on fertility as a serious congenital birth defect has. It just is the case that fertility decline happens in the mind first. And I think one of the reasons that fertility is probably still high in Israel is because people in Israel kind of have a sense of what their story is. I think in Georgia, people were kind of given a story about what the nation was. Now, I think over time, Georgia has failed to live up to the promise that a lot of Georgians hoped for in 2006, 7, etc. But when you can give people a story of where their life and their family fits into a transcendent community. There's a great book called Birth Control in American Modernity by Trent McNamara, where he talks about affiliation in the transcendent community as being a central part of how people make fertility decisions and how their fertility behaviors are shaped. And I think that's very credible. I think it's a reasonable explanation for the fertility behavior of Abrahamic believers, because what we all share, we don't all share rules around marriage, sex, contraception. We often have different rules on these things, abortion. But what we do share across all of us is a strong sense that the faith is creating a people, a society, a culture that we are a people now because of the faith, whether it's Islam or Judaism or the most correct version, confessional Lutheranism. This sense of peoplehood is pervasive in the Abrahamic faiths in a way that it is not the case in Hinduism or Buddhism. In Hinduism, a deep commitment to the faith is in fact segmenting of the people, right? Because there are types of people, and the more seriously you take the religion, the more seriously you take the fact that the other types of people are very different from you, right? That you might not mix with them. And Buddhism just has a whole different conception of the individual and their position in relation to the cosmos. And so I think that the sense of peoplehood is ultimately a sense of transcendent community. It's a sense that I am spiritually connected to my great-great-great-great-great-grandparents and to my great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. And I think that the individualization of modern American religion that you see across many, many denominations and sects is a serious challenge in that regard. There's the question, I'll say that like non-denominational evangelicals do not have exceptionally high fertility rates. I mean, granted, neither do Lutherans right now, unfortunately. But we are losing the sense of peoplehood as we become a kind of individualistic culture that even permeates into what should be the communitarianizing elements of our culture and religion. But increasingly, our religious communities are not bought into that idea.
So is part of the answer then bringing religion back, that we should hope for some kind of religious moral awakening that actually reshapes America, reshapes other countries at a mass level?
You know, on the role of faith, it does seem to me that the whole fertility rates discussion is within a technocratic society that is very used to, okay, we've got this social problem. What is a government program that will fix it? Or what is a tax change that will fix it? And fertility is interesting in that it comes up against the limits of a government bureaucracy to fix this particular social issue. A recent article just came out in the New York Times a week or two ago. You probably saw it, by Anna Sussman, that I found it to be a pretty interesting one. But near the end, she comes almost to the sense of a little bit of hopelessness on what could be done about the fertility crisis, and she points to faith communities that, beyond the reach of technocracy or beyond the ability of technocracy, these faith communities are having children and welcoming children who are able-bodied and who are not, and so just piggybacking off of Shadi there, is that the thing that is the missing piece here, is this sense of supernatural hope that drives human beings to continue the race.
The forms of religiosity that are declining least in the U.S. are not generally the most pronatal ones. So like non-denominational evangelicalism is still kind of eking out growth, and yet is not really associated with higher birth rates. So I think when we say a religious revival, not just any religion, right? It would have to be a religion that actually stays in the Abrahamic tradition. That is about peoplehood. It has to be a hearth religion, if you will. It has to be a religion that's actually something that the family feels.
What's a hearth religion?
Transmission occurring primarily at home, not at church. Right? If you need a church to pass your religion on, your faith is a dead end.
Huh. That's a strong statement.
I mean, it's just true. I mean, successful religious transmission cannot be achieved professionally. It is only achievable in the long run when it is passed on non-professionally by parents in immediate social communities. When parents in immediate social communities are not passing it on, it doesn't get passed on, and they just go and do something else. And for parents in immediate social communities to pass it on, it's almost certainly going to have to be an endogamous religion. That is, strict norms about not marrying out. And so I think the reality is that American Christianity is not prepared for the version of itself it will have to be. And so I think the most likely religious revival is one that will not succeed in raising fertility. And so we will likely not actually see a successful change in this from religion in the near future.
What about the turn to Catholicism? How would you sort of judge the kind of growing number of young Catholics, a slight uptick?
Yeah, you do see there are some of these places. So like, I mean, yeah, you've got like kind of, neo-traditionalist movements in lots of denominations. I certainly within Presbyterianism, there's like a strong neo-traditionalist movement. Sometimes a very extreme one. Within my own church, there's definitely, I'm definitely part of a neo-traditionalist reaction of sorts, though there are some extreme ends of it I don't love. You certainly see this in Catholicism as well, in Orthodoxy. But fundamentally, if you're counting on religion to bail you out, you need to realize it's probably not going to be a very nice religion. It's going to be a religion that is not very interested in exogamy.
Just say what that is for listeners.
Marrying out of the faith. It's going to be a religion that places a really high priority on the family and kin ties. That doesn't mean not a conversionist religion. The Abrahamic faiths are all open to conversion in various degrees. But American evangelicalism has systematically deprogrammed itself on virtually every kind of familism that I think ashes make excellent fertilizer sometimes.
There's a darker side to some of the things you just mentioned.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, it's a question of whether we want to accept that trade-off. It sounds like the kinds of Christians who will actually have more babies are maybe the kinds that are going to be very strict, very conservative, very intense, not very welcoming of outsiders, not flexible in terms of how to interpret the faith. And that might not be great for American democracy in political terms. So how do we kind of square the circle there? What should we want?
I think that there are a couple ways to think about this. One is, you try and get some life rafts going for everybody else. The sooner the government wakes up and starts trying to raise fertility for the general population, the less you have to worry about a world where Amish church discipline is actually law. I mean, just frankly, the policy that we talked about on the front end is like part of how you avoid that outcome. Two, right now, a lot of these neo-traditionalist movements in various groups are quite extreme. Some of them are. And some of that is they're extreme because they're not yet successful. Right? Like they can kind of afford to be extreme because they don't actually have to accomplish anything yet. But in the long run, the great moderator is actually having to build institutions. So I think that in the long run, there are versions of neo-traditionalism that are probably compatible with broadly modern lives as we think of them. The Amish version is not. The ultra-Orthodox Jewish version is not. The Salafi version, the Gulf, some of the Gulf states are giving it the best shot they can, but it's touch and go. Figuring out what this will look like in the future is tricky, and particularly if you get into a world where virtually all of the children are being raised by people who are 2 standard deviations to the right of your Constitution. But I think it's also worth recognizing we're kind of there already. There's several studies that have just asked, conservatives have had bigger families for a couple generations now. How much has it shifted our politics rightward based on what we know of fertility rates and conversion rates across political ideologies? And the answer is anywhere from 1 to 5 percentage points of a popular vote. That's what we've accomplished so far in terms of fertility differentials influencing politics. And that was with a fertility differential of about 0.1 to 0.3 kids per woman between liberals and conservatives. We're now at a fertility differential of about 0.5. So you can expect conservatives in the future to have anywhere from a 0.3 or a 3% to a 12% electoral advantage over their current position.
Wow.
So I do think that that's actually a huge, it's kind of you see the train coming from a long way away and you're trying to point it out to people and they just insist that the train is very far away and they're not worried about it. But that train is coming for liberal democracy.
So that's a strong argument for liberals to prioritize pronatalism and to think seriously about how they can encourage a culture of having more kids if they want to win elections.
Or to never have children. And as strange as this sounds, if you think fairly extreme conservatives are going to govern the future, if you think The Handmaid's Tale is the future, don't have daughters.
Yeah.
So, and I think that this is a real concern. I hear this from liberals often. They're like, well, I would like to have kids, but I'm afraid the future is going to be right-wing reaction. And I'm like, well, it will be if that's your attitude.
Yeah. I mean, the third option, which you two didn't open up on, which is the other way for those on the left to have a place in the future, is to play a stronger role with public education. So sort of shaping these young conservative kids towards more left-wing liberal ends. So
but that strategy is kind of maxed right now. If anything, it seems like more and more people are moving away from public education. So I'm not sure that there's much more juice to get out of that pineapple.
Well, gosh, Lyman, it's been absolutely wonderful to have you here. I'd like to give you the final word and post back and bring us back to this Hauerwas quote, just because I'm just going to use my host privileges here. And his question is, what kind of people do we need to be to be capable of welcoming children into this world. And so I wonder, for our listeners, if you could give them a call to action of what kind of people do we need to be hospitable to children and families, to be the kinds of people who support mothers who don't leave them on an island on their own. What is your word for us in terms of, the kind of people that we need to be?
All too often, we characterize the parable of the Good Samaritan as a parable about poverty, about crossing racial or ethnic lines, and it can be about those things. But ultimately, what it's about is noticing the need that God put in your path. And increasingly, we live in a society where we do not do that. I can notice a need anywhere in the world as long as it's on Instagram. But my 80-year-old neighbor who hasn't left her house in 3 weeks, I would never notice her. We have to become people who are not socially incapacitated by the disembodying revolution, if you will. We have to make that choice. We have to notice those in the ditch, and that might mean the poor. It might mean children. It might mean children who aren't born yet. And so I think that the kind of people we have to be are people who actually look around at your actual neighbors within 800 meters of your house, and you make friends with them. And if you're not doing that, if you're not looking for people in your actual church or your actual t-ball league or your actual book club, or if you don't have any of those actuals, then you're going the wrong way.
Okay. Amen. That's a cautionary tale, word of warning, and thank you so much, Lyman. This was fascinating. We could have gone for another hour. I just find this is such a rich topic, and there's so much to discuss. So we really appreciate you coming on and joining us.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and we look forward to calling you Dr. Stone here.
Indeed, imminently.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks a lot, Lyman.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Zealots at the Gate. If you like what you heard, check out other episodes at comment.org. Zealots at the Gate is hosted by Comment Magazine, produced by Rachel Collins. Technical production is by Allie Crummy. Audience strategy by Matt Crummy. And editorial direction by Ann Snyder.